Hi, and welcome to The Individual Animal, a podcast about dogs, people, and discrimination. I'm Regina.
And I'm Nikki. And today we are going to be talking about transports, specifically transports from southern states that have lots of dogs up here to New England, and some policies that we've seen arise with those transports that are getting us very irritated. Today on the podcast joining us is our executive director, Stacy Coleman. Hey, Stacy, how are you?
Hi, everybody. I'm good. Thank you.
And we also have Chris Bender joining us. So Chris is the adoption and shelter manager at our local shelter, the Dutchess County SPCA. And he's going to be talking to us today about his experience with transports and give us some numbers he's done from last year so we can get some insight on what is actually going on and what's happening in our local community. So I want to get started talking about the reason why we wanted to do a podcast on transports. For me, it started a few years back when I was just starting my career at Animal Farm. I visited St. Hubert's, an animal shelter in New Jersey that does a lot of really great things. They also have a very large transport program where they facilitate transports from the south, and the dogs go from the south to St. Hubert's and then get dispersed across the northeastern states to shelters depending on their needs. And while I was there and I was getting a tour, I was told that they do not transport dogs labeled pit bull. And originally when I was there and I had asked, they had said they don't do that because New England already has a pit bull problem. That was the words I got from the woman I spoke to. And I was sort of new at animal welfare at the time, and I was kind of like, what? I don't really understand what she's talking about. But I was definitely intrigued in figuring out like what this pit bull problem they were perceiving meant. And what I've learned, fast forwarding to where I am now with Animal Farm, and all of my experience where I have gone out to more shelters than I can count to speak with them on their policies, talk to them about removing breed labels, tour their shelter, see what's going on, see what changes that they can make to send pets home faster, and that being shelters all over the country. And I've really been able to talk to these folks and see, what's going on and how different shelters have different problems. What I've actually learned is that I think we all kind of have the same problems. They just are a little bit different in each individual shelter because all shelters are individuals, guys. So, in working with all of these shelters and all the people that work in the shelters, I've noticed that there is, when we're down south, there's way more dogs than you're going to see when you're in the northeastern states. There's a very big difference between the two. I definitely recommend anybody that has the opportunity, especially folks up here in our area, if you have the opportunity to visit a shelter with a high intake in the south, like Lifeline in Atlanta, to do so, because it was probably the biggest eye-opening experience of my life when it comes to sheltering and what hurdles we still have to overcome. And one of those big hurdles, because they have so many dogs, is making sure that we build a very strong transport across the country. So, saying all this, I mentioned I talked to shelters about breed labeling. And the other day, I was talking to one of the conferences I'm going to be speaking at this year, telling them about what I talk about when I talk about removing breed labels. And one of their biggest concerns was that they were worried if they removed breed labels in shelters, how were they going to work their transports out? And the person said to me, because none of our transports will take pit bulls. And I was like, yeah.
Boo!
And I knew like a little bit that this was going on because of my experience with St. Hubert's, a few years back. But my brain kind of exploded. I was like, I can't believe that this is still a problem, and we really need to talk about it, and we really need to showcase that it shouldn't be a problem. And that's why we have Chris Bender on the show today. He's going to tell us about his success with transport. I don't really want to do a deep dive into the inaccuracies of visual breed identification, but I do want to sort of start the conversation out by saying that I think one of the biggest problems that we're having with this is that we are animal welfare is that are still labeling their animals, dogs that are coming through their doors that don't look specifically exactly like a purebred dog and are just like a muddy, medium to large, short-haired dog are getting slapped with a pit bull label, which I think is part of the reason that there's this huge fallacy that we have so many pit bulls in our shelter and we don't know what to do with all these pit bulls. It's because you're deciding that you have all of these XYZ dogs. Does that make sense? I feel like I kind of went off on a tangent there, a ranty tangent.
Yeah, it does. It does, but it's a really important point. Can I add to that?
Yes, please do.
Good. So, Stacy here. When we first started, and this was even before Nikki got here, when we first started doing what we're doing, which is going around to shelters and helping them overcome the barriers to adoption, because we kept hearing over and over again, nobody wants our pit bulls, nobody wants our pit bulls. So we thought, you know what, we need to get out of upstate New York and start going around the country and getting to know these dogs that the shelters are having trouble placing, understanding what's unique about their community and what particular challenges they have in their own communities, so that we can develop some plans and some truly helpful tips. And through that tour of shelters all across the country, we learned that what people call pit bull in New York are different than what people call pit bull in Georgia, in LA, in Maine, in Minnesota. You know, you're getting the idea here, right? So what was happening was shelters were collecting the dogs in their shelters. Their software system was requiring a breed label. They had that ridiculous breeds of the world poster slapped up behind the intake desk where they turned around and threw a dart and picked what kind of breed it was. And what was happening was, because pit bulls, and I'm doing air quotes here, too bad this is not a visual podcast. Is that such a thing? I guess that's called like a video, right? Anyway, so they are used to hearing that pit bulls are quote unquote flooding the shelters. So they assume that all the dogs coming in are pit bulls. So they start using this label. And pretty soon a shelter has developed its own internal definition of what physically defines what is or isn't a pit bull dog. And it could be unique to that shelter. It could be unique to that region. It could be unique to that individual intake agent at that shelter. But what we were finding is that this huge variety of dogs had the same label, pit bull. And that's what prompted us to really start questioning the accuracy of visual breed identification. So enter the work of National Canine Research Council, Dr. Victoria Voith out in Los Angeles, who really started to help us understand that our visual identification of dogs is really arbitrary. It's based on preconceived notions. And those notions were then putting applied stereotypes onto the dogs that were entering our shelter. So what Nikki is trying to say, and what Nikki has experienced, and because now Nikki is the one who's lucky enough, I'm the one who's lucky enough to get to stay home while Nikki goes and travels all over the country and looks at shelters and helps shelters now, is that the dogs are different in every shelter. So they have a lot in common because dogs are more alike than they are different. Genetically, they're very similar. All dogs, regardless of what they look like, because they're the same species, because they're dogs. But what they look like doesn't have as much impact on how those dogs are going to behave. Yet, shelters were labeling a lot of these dogs, and it became sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So they were labeling a lot of dogs pit bull, whether they had any sort of consistency and definition. And then they were saying, oh my God, we have so many pit bulls. But it's like, wait, folks, you're applying that label and it's arbitrary. And we've shown you why it's arbitrary, but you're still doing it. And that's what gets really frustrating. Really frustrating when I hear what you just said about what they said about the transports of, yeah, but we can't transport pit bulls because nobody wants pit bulls. It's like, it's a different kind of dog everywhere you go. Let's just drop the label and start sending good dogs home. So, okay. Now I'm the one who went off on a tangent. I hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you for articulating that way better than I did. So I reached back out to St. Hubert's because I really like the work that St. Hubert's does, besides the fact that they're not transporting pit bulls. So I wanted to reach out to them and say, hey, like, what is your actual policy? This is what I heard when I started there. Can you sort of explain to me like why you're doing this and give me a statement so I can understand it a little bit better. So I want to read, I'm not going to read through the whole statement they gave us. We can put that in the show notes because a lot of it I've already talked to you about. It's what they do in regards to transports. But I'm hoping with some help from Stacy, we can sort of break down these points a little bit that they seem to think are important that I don't actually think they are. So they say that one of the criteria of of all the destination partners covered in their Waystation MOU, Waystation is the name of their transport program, is that they continue to assist locally and regionally in their own areas and do not disrupt the programs or displace local animals in favor of transport animals. And they go on to say, while we don't refer to a pit bull problem per se, St. Hubert's gives priority to the bully breeds in need in our own area because the number in shelters are very high, especially in inner city areas like Newark, the largest city in New Jersey. And that's who they provide shelter services for. So they currently transfer a majority of their bully breeds, this is their words, from their partners in New Jersey where the need is so high rather than through their Waystation program. So they're pulling bully breeds in their words from their New Jersey shelter to other shelters, but not from the South through their Waystation program.
So I'm gonna say something that I almost said before. Really what they're doing though, because they're saying they won't take these dogs, is they're doing that thing where they're saying, well, these dogs are different. That is still what they're telling the public. Instead of just taking the dogs because they're dogs, they're still telling the public that there's something different about them.
Right. It sort of goes back to the point that Stacy just made that they're the ones labeling these dogs.
Yeah. And they're creating this problem by saying we can't possibly take these dogs.
Well, and I almost feel like if I can add up maybe a little flavor to that point, I would wonder, because I have not experienced the same thing in our community here in Dutchess County. I have not experienced it. I mean, yeah, do we absolutely get some folks that come in and say, oh, golly, you've got a lot of quote unquote, like Stacy, I'm putting up big time air quotes here. You got a lot of pit bulls here. We do get some people like that, but I feel like over the years it's gotten to be less people that come in like that. And, we really just talk to people about dogs being dogs. And I kind of wonder, I almost wonder if I'm going to rephrase their quote unquote, what they call a pit bull problem. I'm wondering if some of these shelters have an adoption problem. And that, maybe I wonder what their adoption policies are, because my experience has been that, it seems like a lot of places have pretty tight policies and don't seem to maybe trust their community as much as I would want to trust my community, and as much as we do trust our community here in Dutchess County, that, we try to not be restrictive with our adoption policies. We try to have conversations with people and try to understand their situation and who they are and place a pet with them and not make it seem like a criminal investigation for an adopter walking through our door, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you have a great point, Chris. Yeah, I'm sorry, Nikki. I'm sorry, but I want to say that I have seen, so I've seen Dutchess County SPCA since before Chris started, and how they used to categorize the animals and the dogs, and even the cats too, which they don't do that anymore either. to where they are now and they don't put a breed label on anything, and instead they have a conversation about who this individual dog is and what you're looking for in your individual home and make the matches that way. And these animals are flying through their system. And these are not, we're not, no, don't say, but are they good homes? Yes, they're good homes. Yes. You know why? Because the people at the Dutchess County SPCA care about animals just like most people in shelters do. So yes, they're good homes. And they're flying out the door. And when I travel around the country, I love using our local shelter as an example of saying, this is once the staff that work there, once the people who were the agents for the animals, the ones taking care of the animals and making the matches, stopped seeing a breed label and started seeing those individual dogs, the adoption rate went up. And it's because there's no accidental or purposeful bias coming out of the shelter workers into the minds of the public. I'm sure of it. So yes, Chris, thank you for making that point.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, Stacy. And I feel like, we absolutely don't. We see characteristics, we see behavior. And that's really what we try to focus on is, dogs that are going to appeal to our adopter community. And just, matching them up with the best home, regardless of, I don't know. For me, to try to put judgment on looks, I can't personally help but in my mind think to the many social issues that we're talking about in the human realm about labeling people and not labeling people and how damaging it can be to label people based on, one factor or one thing you look at them on the outside. I mean, how it's 2019. It's surprising to me, and maybe it's because I am engrossed in the industry now, right? But it's surprising to me that people still aren't catching on yet, or I guess they are catching on, but I'm hoping they continue to catch on even more. That it's kind of the same thing.
So okay, just for fun here, guys, while we are on this podcast, so okay, I'm going to step back a little bit. So I'm going to echo what Nikki said, and I think what St. Hubert's does now, they do a lot of really good stuff, and in fact, we have been able to help in our own community, and Chris can attest to this, a lot of extra house cats with the help of St. Hubert's, because they have this great transport program for cats too. And the cats come in and they're lovely and healthy, and they go home in about 2.3 seconds too, because
wonderful cats.
Is amazing. So, but for fun, for my own background information here, I decided to go to the Pet Finder page just now for the dogs in the Newark shelter. And I'm scrolling through the dogs, and oh my God, the pictures are great, and all the dogs are happy and smiley and adorable. But the variety of dogs that they have labeled the same thing is almost funny. Like, it would be funny if it wasn't a barrier to adoption. So
yeah,
they've got all of these different dogs who look different. Their sizes are different. Their colors are different. Their body shape is different. Their ears are different. Their noses are different. And undoubtedly their personalities are different too. But they're all labeled the same thing, Pit Bull Terrier mix.
Yeah.
And then that means that even though they don't look anything alike, they're going to get lumped into a category and not make it to a transport or to the adoption floor or whatever it is. I don't know exactly how they make their choices as to where their dogs go based on a label. But it's a good example of just how absurd it can be. And I'm not, I don't want to pick on the staff of the Newark shelter or St. Hubert's or anybody. Sometimes shelter administration is still too held on to mythology to let this breed label thing go. But just for fun, go look at their Pet Finder page. And don't forget to smile at all the cute faces, but see how different they all are. I'm sorry, I went off on an opposite direction, didn't I?
No. I don't want to point the finger just at St. Hubert's. I tried to do some research prior to the podcast. I haven't heard back from some organizations because I was trying to figure out if this is a transport specific problem or if it's a shelter, if it's the receiving shelter issue, an issue from the receiving shelters. And I think what I found is that it's both. So it's not just St. Hubert's that has these policies. I think what I've found is that a lot of receiving shelters, and from what I've talked to from people in the southern shelter, will tell me that the shelters that come in to pull dogs will say, we don't want to take any of your pit bulls. So, and they're not associated with St. Hubert's at all. So it's not just St. Hubert's. This is a larger problem than just St. Hubert's. I want to really showcase how well our local shelter is doing. Just show that we should just be taking dogs based on their personalities and not based on the way that they look. And I have a couple questions for you, Chris, but I want to talk about my recent experience. Me and our colleague at Animal Farm, Bernice, recently went down to Georgia to a shelter down there, who is working really hard to get all of their dogs out alive, if we're being honest. And they had one of their dogs that they were labeling a pit bull that was on their euthanasia list, and on his kennel card said, hold euthanasia, such and such organization is trying to network this dog. We decided to pull the dog, and he is currently in our Paws of Purpose program as a candidate for a service dog. So Southern shelters are having to euthanize dogs that could go on to be extremely awesome pet dogs. This dog might even go on to be a service dog, because shelters in the Northeast don't want to pull a dog because it looks a certain way, which is really messed up.
I mean, I can definitely echo what you said, Nicole. It's been my experience when I've been down at the shelters that we work with in Atlanta. I've absolutely heard the same thing. I've heard the same thing. They, hey, you guys are one of the only people, you guys being us, Dutchess County SPCA, are, just one of the few people coming in and saying, no, whatever, I'm not worried about breed, just show me your nice dogs. Unfortunately, a lot of people, it sounds like most of the rescues that are approaching them are going in and saying like, hey, I'll take whatever you've got under 20 pounds, or I'll take whatever you've got that looks like and I'm going to throw open air quote, looks like a German Shepherd or this specific, breed, etc. But yeah, it definitely seems like there's not a lot of rescues that I've heard of yet that, are just going in with the idea of like, let's just get nice dogs.
So, Chris, I'm going to, Stacy here, I'm going to add to your point there. So one of the things that we do when we go to communities who are really interested in figuring out how to get their own pit bull dogs outside of their shelters faster into their own communities, we talk about what are you doing in your own community to change the perception with adopters. So are you doing goodwill and happy news stories and things that include dogs that look like what your shelter or region calls pit bulls? And are you doing that in a way where you're just leaving the name off? So one of the things that you do, that you guys at the SPCA do, Chris, so well is you have local opportunities to feature your dogs so that the community sees your dogs. And when you do that, you don't put a label on the dog. So the people who may not have a prejudice, the adopters who don't have a prejudice, are never fed that prejudice. They see a dog. So you take your dogs out and you showcase that animal without putting a label on it. What, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do? You guys do such a great job with that.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying so. And yeah, I feel like it's a second nature at this point for us, because we legitimately don't think about the breed. I mean, we get asked about it daily, as you guys know, and anybody working in a shelter knows, it's one of the first question or two that you're going to get asked on, from a lot of adopters. And, for us, the response of, we mark everybody a mixed breed unless we've got, papers from a breeder or something like that. We mark everybody a mixed breed. And it really, you'll get a couple of people that kind of push to, for an answer, but most people just really drop it right away and move on to the things we want to talk about with them, which are, hey, how nice this dog is, or, hey, we think this particular dog will suit you guys. And yeah, we've got some great partners in our community that help us out with helping to market those, all of our dogs, regardless of what they look like. We've got some great radio station partners that we work with to bring our dogs to, and I've brought little dogs and big dogs and fluffy dogs and short-haired dogs and dogs with ears that bend one way or the other, etc. And nobody that I've met at the radio station has ever given me a funny look or said, golly, is that a blank? And I think, to your point, I think a lot of that is because I'm just walking in with a fun dog and having a good time with it. And, I'm not making anything out of, whatever the dog's size of the head is or whatever, people might think. Yeah, it really does. I feel like removing the label and not needing the label for the thing and just treating the thing. And in this case, the thing is an animal. It's a living being. Not labeling it yourself, I think, comes across to people. And if you don't make it important, then to your point, if they don't already have a prejudice, then it's not going to be important to them either, most likely. So, yeah, I think, it does work really well for us. And, our adopters, we just focus the conversation on fit. And that's the only, that's it. We're just looking for fit. If you've got some other dogs at home, hey, let's make sure we have a dog that is going to get along with those dogs. If you've got, et cetera, if you're in an apartment, let's get you a dog that's not real barky all day. Things like that. To us, breed is definitely never our part of the conversation. We may have some adopters that ask about it, but we just don't think it's really important because we don't know. We don't have any idea. We're a shelter. We don't have $100 a dog to do DNA tests.
Exactly. And you know what, you guys, that's one of the smartest things that you guys do. I mean, you do a lot of great stuff these days, but that's one of the smartest things that you guys do is say, I don't know. So I see that on your social media post. So you'll put a dog up for adoption or you do a playgroup video or whatever, and you guys are not labeling the dogs. You give the dog a name and you describe who that dog is and what that dog likes to do. And the beauty of it is that you are honest. So if the dog is grouchy, you say the dog's grouchy. If you say the dog loves other dogs, you say the dog loves the dogs he's met here. It's all great, you guys, the way you do that. But if somebody posts, oh, so-and-so is really adorable, what kind of a dog is he? The social media folks that do your sites, they answer so wisely. They say, we don't know. Or if it's a pedigree dog and you say it's a such and such. But that honest answer is really great. And I think sometimes shelters, and we're getting off the transport topic here, sorry, Nick, but I think sometimes shelters are afraid to be honest and say, I don't know, because they feel like they should know. But you can't know. You just can't know unless you have a pedigree or a DNA test. You don't know. So it's okay.
Right. They're all mixed breeds, just like us. I can tell people I'm Irish, but it's only 3/8 on my mom's side. So
exactly. And so when it comes to transports, I think we're making our own jobs of saving lives and helping animals, which is why everybody does this, harder by relying on a breed label. And so let's get real though for a minute. There are certain restrictions for if a dog is assumed to have the label pit bull, there are sometimes bad things that can happen. So if your landlord says you're not allowed to have a pit bull, then you need to have that conversation individually with the adopter and the adoption staff to determine whether or not that dog is going to fit the criteria for discrimination in your particular situation. But that's not something you can do with a broad brush because the perception of the landlord is going to be individual, depending on that particular person, whether or not there's breed-specific legislation in your area or in your surrounding area or near you, and you're worried about placing a dog or transferring dogs in because of discrimination that is mandated, then what you need to do is do it on a case-by-case basis with your adopters and with your dogs and with the landlords and with the animal control to see, is this a dog you're going to discriminate against before you place that dog or transport that dog?
Yeah, Stacy, that's a great point. And I think, you kind of, I think that alludes to the point that it's such a larger issue, right? It's a community issue. It's a mindset issue. And I guess in that way, I don't want to use the word defend, but as far as, like Nick said before, like I wouldn't want to single out St. Hubert's, right? Because like you mentioned, they've been a fantastic transport partner with us. We get phenomenal cats from them. I have been reluctant to contact them about transporting dogs because I had understood that, they had restrictions on breed. And to me, that's just not something that I believe in, especially when we can't determine breed. And so we're restricting, based on made up breed. But I understand, and I guess I sympathize with the pressure, that certain shelters might have based on their adopter community, because the education hasn't happened in that community. And I think as shelters, it's got to start with the shelters. It's got to start with us, because we interact with these adopters, we interact with the community. And I really do feel like if we're walking the walk and talking the talk, and we say, look, no, we really, no, we can't tell you because it's not scientifically accurate. If I do tell you, if I make up a breed for this dog, I'm basically just lying to you because I know you want to hear something. And I get how that's maybe that's a hard conversation to have because the industry's always wanted to put a label on the dog. But I think it's a hard chore that the more shelters that decide to be brave and be the best support they can for all of their dogs by not labeling any of them, I think it'll, hopefully that'll get us somewhere.
I agree. And Nikki and Regina, I feel like Chris and I, your guests, have hijacked your podcast. But I have another question for Chris.
No, I don't think you have. But I think the next question, though, is, so, we're talking about what people should do, but then how do we know this is what people should do. We know people shouldn't breed label. We know they shouldn't judge a dog based on how it looks and what breed they think that dog falls under. But we can just tell them you shouldn't do that. But how do we change their minds? And then Chris hit on a good point. Well, what if they're feeling pressure from their community to label a dog? So what's the advice that you all can give to people? I feel like this is probably like 10 podcast episodes worth, this question I just asked. But what advice would you give shelters, especially for connecting with their community? I mean, for me, I think, and this is also sort of because it's my world, but like, have a great social media presence. And Stacy, you touched on this, on how great, the local shelter is with their social media, that's how you can educate the public. Chris, do you have and Nikki and Stacy, do you have advice for shelters who want to break out of this, but are unsure or feel like too much pressure? They feel like they can't do it. Do you have advice for them?
Breaking habits is very hard, and breed labeling is a habit. It's not a fact in shelters. If you don't know where they come from, it's a habit. So, and it's really hard to break habits. We all know that. And I think that's the hardest part, is recognizing it's a habit and not a fact, and breaking that habit and being confident in your knowledge when you could say to an adopter, I don't know what this dog is, but he likes to chase a ball. I don't know what this dog is, but he's really lazy. I think that's my best advice. But Chris, Nikki, what do you got? What do you got?
Yeah, no, I like that. I personally like, and I think part of it is having a strong belief, right? Having a strong belief in wanting to be fact-based, wanting to be science-based, not wanting to buy into stereotypes or prejudices or labels or any of these things that, again, in a 2019 environment, we automatically, any of those words, if I applied them to a human situation, we'd automatically think, ooh, that's terrible. And most people would, I think, these days, or a lot of people anyway. For me, I like to actually, people ask, well, what kind of dog is that? If they ask me directly what breed is that dog, then I'll just give them I don't know. I don't know. We don't have a DNA test. If they ask me what type of dog that is or what kind of dog that is, I'll play a little bit of purposeful ignorance, and I'll ask as if I thought they're asking me something about the dog's personality. And I'll reply with, she's a pretty little girl that just loves, cuddles, or, he's a handsome boy that likes to chase a ball. I almost feel like in my experience, if I answer that way, some people go right back to no, what breed is the dog? But then there's other people, you kind of see you see the look in their eye, like they think before asking the question again. And then some of them do, but some of them don't actually ask the question again. And we just move on to talking about what we should be talking about, which is the dog's personality. So that's one of the tricks I like to use that I found has worked.
If we can, I would like to go back and ask Chris about his first time experiencing a shelter with a lot of dogs. So we're very lucky here in Dutchess County and in the Northeast in general, that there's not the shelters don't remain full like they do in some regions and some cities. And like Nikki talked about at the beginning, when she first experienced and how it was such an eye-opening experience for her to go to a place where there are shelters with 5 and 6 dogs, adult dogs, and one kennel run because the shelter is scrambling so fast and so hard to get these dogs out because they're good dogs. No matter what they look like, they're good dogs and they deserve to go home. And there are plenty of homes. We just need to get the dogs to the right space so that the people can find them. So if we could, I would like to hear about Chris's first experience. So Chris came to this. Tell us a little bit about where you came from, what brought you into wanting to work in a shelter, because your story is great and it's typical to some people who work in sheltering, but a lot of people haven't had your benefit of experience of going outside of their own region to see what's happening around them. Tell us a little bit about where you came from and your experience and why transfers are so important to you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I've only been a professional in the animal welfare industry for about 1.5 years now. I was a volunteer for 6 years before that here at the Dutchess County SPCA, as well as some other local organizations. My career for 19 years prior to that was corporate accounting and then data analytics IT work. So, always been a spreadsheet person and a data person. I like information. The volunteering that I did here at Dutchess County SPCA was definitely one of the most rewarding volunteer activities I had ever undertaken. Coaching kids basketball was fun too, but kids talk back more than the dogs. So I had always known working in the corporate environment that it wasn't for me. I got into it young. I had a child to put through college. He's grown now. And pretty much as soon as he was grown and had graduated from school, I had already kind of started thinking about maybe someday I need to get out of that and really get into this animal welfare thing. I always had felt like I needed to get out of the corporate thing, but I just didn't know where until I started working with dogs, specifically play groups. I'm a big fan of Dogs Plan for Life and their program that they teach. Big fan of that. Getting dogs out to play, no matter what type of dog they are, as long as they like to be with other dogs. It's just like humans. They want to be around their own kind and have fun and be natural with each other. Playgroup really got me. As anybody who knows me pretty well knows, I'd love nothing more than being out in a yard with 8 or 10 dogs running around, having a great time, smiling, and not being in their kennel. So 1.5 years ago, when the adoption manager position opened up here at Dutchess County SPCA, I applied for it and got the job and have been having the best time of my life in a job that I've ever had. And I have, to your point, Stacy, I've had some wonderful opportunities provided to me through this job to learn even a lot more about what's going on, not just in this county, but in other places. Last year, it was earlier in the year. I don't remember exactly what month, but we went down and visited DeKalb County Animal Services that first time. Actually, I believe we visited both that week, the first time we went down. Yeah, we visited both shelters that week, DeKalb County and Fulton County.
DeKalb and Fulton.
And Fulton, right, yeah. Which between the two, I think at right now and back then had about 500 dogs or so at DeKalb and about 400 or so at Fulton. I remember we went to DeKalb first, and they've got a newer building. I think at the time it was actually less than a year old. They had worked really hard to, get the funding to have a new building put up. So the building itself had a new look to it, and a nice feel to it. I remember when we actually started to go to look through the dogs, and our process is. I guess it's efficient because it has to be. If we're there for just 3 or 4 days and trying to look through 900 dogs between two shelters, it's got to be an efficient process. So we literally just walked around through the kennel areas and would jot down the name of any dog that based on their kennel presentation, just get based on a quick eyeball, really, because that's all the time you've got. And if something stuck out, if they were just being calm, maybe take a moment to interact with them a little bit through their gait. And if they seemed like somebody we wanted to look at further, we'd write it down. But I remember 2 things really stick out to me. Well, maybe more than 2 things, but I guess the first 2 things I'll talk about that really stuck out to me were the smell. We're really fortunate here in our area that we have a reasonable enough number of dogs in our shelter that we basically get to clean from 8 to 12 in the morning, and when we open up for our adopters, everything's pretty sparkly. And throughout the day we can just go in and spot clean a quick mess or something like that. At DeKalb, and at both of those shelters, they're just cleaning all day long. There's no getting done by 12. There's no, having it look pristine when you open up for adoptions. There's just too much. There's just too many to have it, be all clean within a nice little tidy 4-hour window. So there was always smell. There's just always, some smell to it. And just the sheer number of dogs that by the time we were even halfway through, doing our passes at the kennels, it all started blurring together a little bit, which really hit me because I'm a firm believer every dog is an individual, and I want to know that individual. And in the activity of going to pick these dogs, we don't get to meet every individual. There's just too many. There's 900 of them. We have to, each individual gets a 5, 10, 15-second look-see. And, based on that super short glimpse, we're making decisions. And that was hard to process that first time. It was hard to process the first couple of times, I guess.
Can I stop? I want to interrupt for just 1 second here. I remember the first time you made the trip to the the big shelters where they have big intake. And this is like the story that Chris is telling is the kind of thing that just, if I can just use strong language for a minute here, just pisses me right off when people and shelters and transports get precious about the kind of dogs they're going to transport, when there are shelters like those that Chris is describing right now that are working their asses off trying to get the good dogs out alive. So I'm sorry, that's I digress there a bit, but I remember, Chris, specifically when you were going down for your first trip, and I said to Bernice, who's our director of training and behavior, I said, Bernice, talk to Chris ahead of time, talk to whoever's going ahead of time, and tell them whatever you do, don't cry in front of the people who are taking care of the dogs. Because the first time you see a shelter like that, for those people who have never experienced it and genuinely care about animals, the gut response is to start crying because it's so overwhelming, and you know that the majority of the animals are going to be in these crowded kennels and may not get a chance to ever be seen as an individual. So, but if I recall correctly, I think what Bernice reported to me was that when you felt that urge, which is totally human, you stepped outside and collected yourself and came back in, because it's just not fair to the staff who work at those places that are so busy and so crowded to see other people cry at the work they're trying so hard to complete. Anyway, I'm sorry for the interruption. Go ahead.
I want to quickly talk about the staff now that you brought it up really quick. And I agree. I think it doesn't matter how many times I go into a shelter, when I visit a new shelter that is full of animals and they're doing their damnedest to keep them alive and keep them happy and keep them entertained, there's always a moment, no matter how many times I've, gone to a similar shelter, where I need to just take a second and contain myself and move on. But also, the staff there work so hard, and they get these transport companies coming in and these shelters coming in that want to transport, that are happily taking their puppies and their dogs under 35 pounds, which I feel like that's got to be really hard for the staff to be. They are so happy to have people taking anything out of their shelter because they have so many dogs, but it's also got to be, it's got to really hurt a little bit to be like, okay, thank you for taking these dogs, but what about all of our other dogs in our shelter? And they have to also swallow that down and just be grateful that there are shelters taking any dogs at all. So I just really give it up to the staff that work for shelters that have that many animals and are doing so much and still have such a positive attitude every time we go in there.
Here, 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 here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I have met the most hardworking people I've ever known at these shelters in Atlanta that I've been to. I really came back, and to your point, Stacy, yeah, there was a lot of crying that first week. I had to step away quite a few times. I'll admit it. I'm a sensitive soul, but never in front of them. Never, because how could I? How dare I? Right? I get to fly back to my shelter with, our 20 or 30 dogs at a time that we've got, and we get to get them out 4 times a day, every single day. They get their pee walk right in the morning, etc. These guys are battling. They're warriors down there, and the stuff that they just have to process on a daily basis, it's impressive, and it's very humbling. I think that was probably the biggest thing that I really came away with as far as my perception of my work here, of how I would never say easy. It's definitely not easy. None of it's easy, but just how much more reasonable of an amount of work I've got in front of me as a shelter manager here versus somebody that's trying to tackle 500 dogs. One of their rooms has the number of dogs I've got in my entire shelter at any one time, and then they've got 15 or 20 of those rooms. It's the numbers are really, it's mind numbing a little bit. And they're amazing people down there. No doubt.
I agree with you, Chris. And one of the things we think about is the immediacy. So at the SPCA, and you guys are so good with this, is you have space and you have staff and you can take care of these dogs for however long they need to be there. But you guys recognize that moving these dogs through as quickly as you can and removing barriers to adoptions, to the good homes, to the people who are looking for a pet from a responsible source, means that you free up space for some of those dogs that don't have a chance. Some of those dogs that don't get picked by transport because they fit somebody's description of pit bull. And I think that's a really important point here, is that even if you have the privilege of having a great building with an amazing adoption public like what we have here in Dutchess County, and even though you can take care of those dogs for as long as they need to be here, it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. The right thing to do is to move those dogs into good homes and fill those spaces with the dogs that don't have a chance.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We've got, to me, it's almost like the old, what was the old Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yep.
Right. We've got this Right, we've got this phenomenal adoption floor. We've got this phenomenal adoptive community to the point, and we don't have a population problem in Dutchess County for dogs. We don't, and I know you know this. If we didn't transfer in dogs to our shelter, we would end up with 5 or 6 dogs on our adoption floor most of the time, and most of them would have some sort of limitation. You're right. This dog's grouchy with cats, or this dog's grouchy with this or that or whatever. So I look at the transport program from both angles. To your point, absolutely wanting to help a situation that I've seen that I can now never unsee. I think about DeKalb and Fulton County on a regular basis, even when I'm not in a position to pull, even when we're pretty full. They're in my thoughts. But I also think about our adoptive community, our adopter community here, that they love these dogs that we're bringing in, and we wouldn't have dogs here for them to adopt. Honestly, we wouldn't have a variety. Wouldn't have a variety of dogs that would fit the variety of needs or desires that our adoptive community has if we weren't bringing dogs in from other places. And to Nikki's point, we could absolutely go down there and fill a van with 20 puppies and dogs that look a certain way that we don't think that the people that are going to try to label would label them as, big quote, air quotes, pit bull. I mean, we could absolutely do that. And they would welcome us, and they would be friendly and would thank us for our help. But I kind of feel like, and I think our agency feels like, we'll absolutely, mix it up on a transport so that we've got, some different looks and some different shapes and sizes and things like that. But, to us, again, breed it doesn't matter. And it doesn't seem to matter to my adoptive community either much. Again, if it's a nice dog, it's a nice dog.
I think that really brings up like 2 points. So for one, and this goes back to, what Nikki was saying, that how it makes the staff feel when people come in and they want to quote unquote help, and obviously they are helping, but they're only going to take certain dogs. And I feel like, and maybe this is the wrong thing to say, so you guys tell me, but I feel like if you only want to help certain dogs, then are you really helping? But when you're excluding dogs that may get slapped with a certain label, like I just feel like either you want to help all dogs or you don't want to help at all. Like it just doesn't seem helpful. Like it just makes me angry, I guess, when people do that. Will only take those certain kinds of dogs. It really does.
Yes. No, I totally understand what you're saying, Regina. And this is one of the things we've talked about, especially in animal control. So the agencies that are taking all of the dogs, the municipal shelters that take all of the dogs, regardless of history, behavior, whatever, they don't have the option of picking and choosing which dogs come into their system. One of the things we tell those agencies is any dog that gets out alive is a win. So even if an organization or a transport company is coming in and picking and choosing only the cute and fluffies or the babies, let them go, because you've saved a life. And then we at Animal Farm or at Dutchess County SPCA, who doesn't discriminate, will come in and we'll do our best to help you get those other dogs placed too. And I keep bragging about our own SPCA, but one of the things that they do is they don't go in and take just puppies. They might take a litter of puppies or they might not, but they'll go in and pick adult dogs. But not all agencies, like you're asking, Regina, not all agencies will do that. But even if they do, let them go and be thankful that that's one life saved.
Yeah, I was hesitant to do this podcast because we do get treated like royalty when we go to those shelters because we're taking all the different dogs.
But isn't that sad, though, Nikki? Isn't that sad that we're
absolutely,
treated like
absolutely.
royalty when we go? Because we take, so I got to tell you. So I'm the executive director of Animal Farm Foundation and its subsidiary, National Canine Research Council. It is a really, really good day when I actually get the opportunity to touch a dog, because mostly I'm on the phone and on my computer and doing stuff with people and not dogs. Anyway, so I got a call after this last trip where the Bernice and Nikki and Chris and everybody went down to our partner shelters down in the South, and I got a call. It said, we're bringing back a lot of dogs, and some of them are puppies and some of them aren't, and they're kind of a hodgepodge, and that's just what we needed to do. And I go and meet these dogs, and I'm looking at them, and I'm thinking, none of these dogs look alike. None of them look like the dog next to them. But all of these dogs have the same label of pit bull, or unadoptable because of their color.
What is that?
Yeah.
Most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. These are lovely animals, and we as shelter folk need to stop deciding what the adoption public wants. We have our own prejudice. We have our own ideas as shelter folk, as people who work in shelters every day. But let that mythology go. Transport the dogs that are good dogs, and assume the best in people. And our adoption public is going to step up, and they're going to take these dogs home.
Yeah, I feel like that may be a good closing. That was a
great closing. Chris, thank you so much. You were an awesome guest. We'll have to have you back on.
Oh, thank you. It was a lot of fun.
If you like what you heard here and you like the work that we do to bring dogs and people together to end discrimination, you can visit animalfarmfoundation.org/donate to make a donation. Follow AFF on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as well as the Individual Animal Podcast page on Instagram and Twitter. This podcast was produced by AFF and edited by Nicole Yukon. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and review. Thanks for listening.